It's been a while since I published any long form interviews, and I've done a couple of those over the last couple of months, and I'm going to start publishing them over the coming weeks and months here on this channel. And I'm very excited to share some of these conversations with you. They have been life-changing conversations for me, and I think you'll really get a lot out of them. This first conversation that you're going to hear today is between me and an amazing relationship expert named Kyle Benson. Kyle graduated grad school just recently to become a marriage and family therapist. He helps run the Gottman Love Lab. He's an expert in attachment theory. And today we're talking specifically about anxious attachment. Now, you'll learn a little bit more about attachment theory in this interview, but people who deal with anxious attachment typically are really constantly seeking validation from their partner. They're constantly trying to get closer to their partner to feel some sense of reassurance. They're worried that they're not lovable. They're worried that they're not enough. And that kind of anxiety, when it's ever present in a relationship, can really kind of take a toll. And so Kyle and I talk about how to identify whether or not you have an anxious attachment style, and then what to do about it, and what to do if you have a partner who experiences anxious attachment. I hope you enjoy the interview. This was recorded as part of the interview series in the Epic Marriage Club that's ongoing. We do at least one expert interview every month live in the Epic Marriage Club. So if you want to participate live in these calls, just go to epicmarriageclub.com. You can sign up. It's super easy, and you can be part of that club that gets to see these interviews live. Hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you do, let me know. Shoot me an email, leave a comment, and I'll make sure that Kyle sees that, because I think it's important to let the people who share their knowledge and information with us know how much of an impact they're having on our lives. Hope you enjoy this interview. All right. Kyle, how's it going, man?
It's good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I like how we've been talking for a few minutes before the call started. Now we have to pretend like we just started over. Thanks for coming back, man. I posted our last conversation on my podcast yesterday. So a lot of people are going to come in with fresh ears. Some tuned in live and listen to you talk about attachment theory and anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. And they were like, you are telling me about my own marriage right now. Like, you are speaking to us as human beings. So I'm glad that you've come back and you're going to share some insights about what to do if, specifically today, if you or your partner, whoever's listening, experience anxious attachment. So very stoked to have you here. And would you mind starting just by kind of like recapping what anxious attachment is and how all this kind of like plays together, and then we can get into the practical takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, in a very simple way, attachment theory is a study of the way that we connect and maintain connection with other humans. More specifically, it focuses on the people who are really important and close to us. And this starts kind of in our childhood. As we grow up, we learn how to relate to our parents. We learn how to get our needs met. And some of those strategies either become very secure, where we're direct, we're honest, we can go to our parents, we know they're available, we know they're responsive. And so we get this sense that we're valuable and they're reliable. And so we kind of develop, I can be more direct about my needs. And you feel a lot more self-worth as a result. If you have parents who are more unpredictably responsive or engaged, right, you kind of get this mixed signal of, okay, it's unpredictable when I'm going to get what I need. So what strategy do I need to use to get the connection I need to make sure I'm okay, that I survive? And that tends to be more the anxious style, where they start to be a little bit more passive aggressive or indirect, or more, even more caretaking of their parent in childhood, which then, as they become an adult, they tend to take more responsibility for managing the relationship or the marriage or their partner than is actually theirs. And so that's kind of, we'll talk a lot more about that today. Whereas the avoidant, they have parents who are kind of like, you're independent, go do your own thing, don't tell me your needs. They kind of neglect neediness and connection. And so they kind of learn, like, I have to be self-reliant. I can't depend on anyone. I can't rely on anyone. So the only way for me to survive in this world is to actually disconnect and put up a wall to keep people away from getting too close to me, and act as if I'm self-reliant and behave in those ways, which obviously, right, self-reliance can be helpful, but when it's at the cost of connection, that's where we run into problems. And the same thing with the anxious style. When we have too much connection, we lose our individual humanness and like what makes us us. And so we'll talk about that today.
You start to smother the people that you love and overwhelm them.
Yeah, but you also lose yourself. I mean, anxious people will often neglect their hobbies. They'll change parts of who they are to get loved, which is, again, it's a strategy, right? If I can be I'm going to mispronounce this, but that lizard that's like a chameleon, or I'm not pronouncing
chameleon,
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Like if you're like that, like you adjust to your external environment, right? You fit in, right? And that's the belief. If I can fit in, I'll finally get loved. But the reality is you're never really kind of sure of who you are, and that's where we get a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I hear you talking a lot about childhood and attachment for children, and I think there's a stigma that a lot of people have about therapy, that if I go to therapy, I'm just going to have to talk about all my childhood trauma and stuff like that, and I don't want to talk about that stuff. So I want to. Can you kind of explain why? Maybe how your parents treated you in the past, or what kind of the anxiety or avoidance that you learned from your past plays into an adult romantic relationship, and like how those two are kind of intertwined.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Essentially, right, when you're born in whatever environment you're born in, and that environment shapes you. Right? Who you love shapes how you see yourself and how you engage with other people in the world. That with your parents, right? They have, pretty early on your development, pretty much your whole childhood, that they're shaping how you are loved, how to expect love, how to expect connection, as well as how to give that type of connection. Right? And so essentially that's why childhood is somewhat important in this. But if we move into the couples therapy world, right, we will talk a little bit about childhood, but we're more talking about the internalized beliefs about ourselves and about other people, right? And so like an anxious person might kind of wear a mask in their marriage and be like, oh, I don't have any needs, or I'm fine, but then later on kind of blow up at their partner for not being there for them. Right. And so that goes back to, I learned how to stuff my needs in my childhood, and I recreate that same pattern in my adult intimate relationship. Essentially, it's just patterns of relating. And that's why they show up here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So what are some other ways that people who have more of an anxious attachment style by nature, how are some of the ways that they show up in relationships?
A lot of it is there's a lot of passivity with it. They're not very direct about what they need or what they want, because that's a huge risk, right? If I'm direct about what I want, then you have the possibility of rejecting that. And so part of the strategy to prevent that is either I'm going to be passive aggressive, right? And have you try to guess what I need, because it's more risky for me to be direct with you. Or I'm going to be demanding. I'm going to put you in a position that you have to comply. I'm going to be really intrusive and kind of not respect your boundaries because I need more closeness and I feel insecure. And then also just being really controlling, like kind of like, okay, where's your phone? Who you at? Where you spending? Who you're spending time with? And not really letting room for kind of trust to be there. And that all comes back to kind of the core belief that I am not lovable as I am.
It's interesting, because I can see that behavior, what they're trying to create is a sense of connection and trust and togetherness. Exactly. But the more they have to force it, the more they probably don't trust that it's real. And so the more paranoid that they get, that the love that they're getting is obligatory love and not voluntary love. Is that fair?
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And that's what we know about it, right? When you have a certain belief system, right, you operate out of that belief system and you engage your partners in that way, right? And this is why therapy or even learning about this stuff can be really helpful, because then you can experiment with behaving in different ways and challenging your beliefs. And if you behave in a different way and get new evidence that you can be more direct with your partner about what you need and they can meet that, whoa, like that might start to change your relationship. Instead of being demanding, your partner can actually connect with you and say, wow, that kind of makes sense. How do we do that?
Can you give me like a generic story of how this might play out in a common way inside of a standard marriage?
Yeah. So I think, for example, I had a couple that I was working with where one of the partners had a betrayal, like in an earlier relationship where a partner cheated on her.
A previous relationship.
Previous relationship. She then was with this other partner and was hyper insecure about that happening again. So much so that if he went to the gas station and was gone longer than 15 minutes, there was phone calls and there was text messages. Hey, where are you? Poke, 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 poke. Like, connection. I need to know I'm okay. And then it would go so far as like, well, you're clearly cheating on me, or you don't care about me. You never invest in our relationship. So a lot of kind of guilt-inducing comments to try to get that connection. Again, that's the strategy that's being used. But what happens is that partner then feels like they can't do anything right. They don't know what to do with that. And so what we started to work on is how that partner can say, I'm feeling really insecure and I'm noticing this fear that you don't love me. Can you just give me some reassurance? Right. And so we worked on the partner doing that a lot more and offering it in a way that would actually connect with that person. And then I also worked for that person individually of what would it be like for you to tolerate sitting in that insecurity or that fear that your partner's doing something and actually give them space to come back to you and show that they are not, to actually get evidence that they are choosing you over everyone else and being invested in this relationship. And we started to collect evidence that actually reinforced that, and that helped kind of change some of the dynamics in their relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. But it's really interesting because it goes back to what you were saying a little bit earlier about how this anxious kind of cycle that people can get swept up into becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you want to change the cycle, you kind of have to change the behavior. You can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Where do you want to go next with this? Like what are some other tools or techniques that we can use to actually, if we identify as an anxious person or our partner might be an anxious person, what are some things that we can do to kind of break through this cycle?
I think the first thing is you need to become better aware of your attachment system, right? An anxious person attachment system is hypersensitive. It's kind of like my fire alarm in the place I'm in, right? If I have any hint of smoke, even from a candle, and it goes off, right? Would I listen to that threat? Right? If I was anxious, I would go, yes, there's a fire in our home. It's going to burn down. We need to get out. Right? That's kind of what the attachment system, if you're highly anxious, is like. It is hypersensitive to any sense of threat of connection or loss of connection. And so one of the big things to work with is slowing that down, right? To kind of learn to take a pause and notice that I am feeling really like the world's about to burn. And then to question, is it actually burning? Or is this just, and the biggest thing is slowing down, because one, the attachment system, since it's so sensitive, it reads things really quickly and sometimes misfires, right? It doesn't quite actually connect with what's actually happening in reality. And so it is both a curse and a superpower. And so it's a curse in that you can sometimes make a judgment that actually causes more problems and recreates that self-fulfilling prophecy, as we talked about earlier. Or if you slow down and give more space to see if your partner's doing the thing you're really worried about them doing, or if you slow down to kind of give yourself a little more space to kind of tolerate what's happening and then go, okay, is this actually true? It actually then becomes a superpower to enhance your relationship, because then instead of being reactive, you get to be more responsive and think about, how can I make this better for myself and for my relationship? And so that's one of the big tools, is one, being able to notice that your attachment system is hypersensitive. I mean, you will even see for anxious people, in session, I'll often go like, what's happening to your face? Why did your face do that? Right? They're so sensitive to any little cue that there's a threat to their partner. There's a threat to the connection. And sometimes the partner can just be tired, or other times there is something there. And that's where the superpower can actually be helpful. But but the problem that comes up with that superpower is oftentimes we take it as fact, and we don't give our partner space to say, no, that has nothing to do with you. I'm actually stressed about work. Right. And so that's one of the big tools initially.
I can relate to that. I know early on in my marriage, I was experiencing a lot of anxiety, and my anxiety came from whenever my wife was not seemed to be like upset or frustrated or not content with something, I would immediately go into what's wrong, what's happening, what's going on, what did I do? And I found that the majority of the time, whatever she was upset about or worked up over had very little to do with me. But by the time I found that out, I had created such a fuss that then it was about me, or I had made it worse. And now I was part of the problem. And you're right, like slowing that down and learning to sense that there might be a problem, get curious about it before reacting and assuming that it was about me, and starting to say like, okay, if you do want to talk to me about something or you need me, I'm here. And then backing away and learning to kind of calm down my emotions and not make it all about me has been really helpful. But I want to take a step back and get even more meta into this. So I know there's somebody listening right now who's like, oh, sure, slowing things down and like maybe calming myself down would be really great. But how the heck do I do that? Because it seems like something happens and then instantly, what you said, I react. I'm not responding. I have decades of just receiving a stimulus and then reacting to it, and I don't know how to slow that down. What are some ways that people can start to slow that process down so that they can more consciously respond to it instead of just having a gut reaction?
The first thing is awareness, right? If you don't have awareness of it, you can't do anything with it. So awareness that that's a pattern that you do, that you react to it. With that awareness, then becomes a little bit more awareness of when you're actually doing it. Okay, I'm starting to react. And even as you're typing the text message, you might get the thought of, oh, am I doing this? That's where you have a choice point. Do I continue to perpetuate the same patterns, or do I choose a different path? Right. And that's what we know. Like it does happen fast, right? That's part of survival, right? Survive. We don't have time to really think about it. But when you can get the awareness that this is a strategy and you start to see how the strategy plays out, then you start to have a little bit more insight when it actually does happen. And that insight can lead you to pause just even for a second and ask, why am I doing this? Where is this coming from? And that often is a starting point where, I've had clients come to me like, oh, like I did that like 12 times this week. Right. And I couldn't believe how frequent it was. Right. And then we actually dive into a little more and they're like, oh my goodness, it was actually like way more than that. I can't believe how sneaky this strategy is. Right. But that's the part of it, is like, you have to start with understanding your strategies.
Right.
How do you try to go about this? How do you approach this? And if you are reactive, if you can see how you do it, it's going to be a lot easier for you to catch it then in the moment and pause. Like literally that breath gives you space to say, what choice do I intentionally want to make? And that's where the power comes.
I love that. I think in every situation like this, there's a stimulus and then a response. And there's a gap between that. And it's very, very small. And it sounds like as you become more and more aware of the pattern, that gap kind of grows a little bit and gives you more space to choose a response. Yeah. Instead of just like going based off of what you may have instinctually taught yourself to do since you were a child, that probably isn't contributing to the type of relationship that you want. Okay. So let's say now I've become aware this is an issue. I've started to notice when I am like resorting to these anxious behaviors. I've started to take advantage of that little gap. Now, what do I do in that situation where I might want to be reactive? What does a response look like in contrast to a reaction?
I think it really depends on the context, but like, let's use some examples here, right?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So if there's this part where you feel like your partner doesn't care about you or isn't committed to you, right? That reaction response is you don't give a shit about me.
Yeah.
You could care two
You
cents.
care more about video games than you care about me or sports.
Right. Very guilt inducing. Right. And what freedom does that give your partner to understand what's happening for you? Because that is very critical of their character. Right. And we talked about that in the last thing we did. But I think going into that, there's that choice. Okay, this insecurity, this thing that's coming up for me, what does it actually need? What does it want? What's the hidden longing? What's the wish of it? Right. And that's where then you get to experiment with this. Right. Like I've had couples where it's like they go in and they say, well, you don't even listen to me. You never care about me. Well, what does caring look like? What could they do to actually help you feel more cared about? Well, hey, like you could help me out with the dishes. Like that's actually one example that we did in a session. I really need to know that I matter to you. I feel lost because I never hear you tell me how much you mean to me or how much I mean to you. Or I never hear you tell me that I'm beautiful and I really worry that I'm not attractive to you. And the partner's like, oh, like what?
Yeah.
You're so attractive to me. Like I didn't realize you were so worried about that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's part of it. Understanding, right. Taking and this is the difference between someone who is more anxious versus someone who's more secure is both people experience the insecurity. The difference is what they do with it. And that's where earned security comes in. It's noticing that I have this insecurity and then choosing how you want to engage it. And that's where security comes in is, hey, like I'm feeling really lonely right now. Instead of you never pay any attention to me. Hey, like I'm noticing this distance between us. Can we do something tonight? Yeah, of course. Right. And sometimes you don't even need to say we're distant or this. Sometimes it's just like, hey, I really miss you, or hey, I want us to connect. Can we play a game tonight? Can we go for a walk? Right. And then your partner's like, yeah, of course. Because go ahead.
No, you finish.
All I'm pointing out is if we can have a better ownership of our needs and what helps us feel more loved and connected in a relationship, we can give our partner a recipe to win our heart. And that's what actually can make us more secure. Insecure, again, very passive, very indirect. Secure is here's what I need to be loved by you. I'm the expert on myself and I'm going to teach you how to love me better. And then I want you to do the same. I want you to teach me how to be a better lover to you. That's a secure relationship.
Beautifully said. So I want to pick out a couple of things that I was noticing while you were giving these examples, because I think that they're great frameworks for other people to use as they kind of move away from this anxious attachment style and move into more secure attachment and earned attachment or earned security. Earned security. Yeah. So the first thing that I noticed you were doing or modeling really well is you were very conscious of your emotions. You were conscious of your needs. And I think a lot of people get really conscious of the discomfort or the not receiving of something and they had never really asked for it. And so the fact that you're able to acknowledge like, oh, I'm lonely, I miss you is really powerful. So I want to encourage people, maybe journaling is a good way to get started on this, of like sitting down and really taking some time to consider, what is it that I want? What is it that I need? What is it that makes me feel loved? And gain some clarity for yourself, because if you can't articulate it, it's unfair to expect your partner to just know what it is that you need. And I think it's something that, like, I remember as a kid, my grandma would like sometimes give us money to go spend in this. She had like a little gumball machine, and we go to her house and she would give us money. And I remember one time we went to her house and I wanted candy out of the machine. And I said, Grandma, can I have some money for the gumball machine? And my parents said, you don't ask for money. Like, that's not okay. That's not appropriate. You know, if people give it to you, that's okay, but you don't just go ask grandma for money. And you learn from a very young age. I think that's one small example of a cultural norm that we have, that you shouldn't ask for what you want. But when you get into marriage, you have to kind of undo that wiring in your brain and get good at identifying, hey, what do I want? And how can I ask for it in an appropriate way to get it? So that's one thing that I noticed. And then the other thing that I noticed is you use the word I'm noticing a lot. like, I'm noticing X, or I'm noticing, we haven't spent time together recently, or I'm noticing I'm feeling some really negative emotions right now. Like, that framework can be a really great way for you to step out of the reaction and instead respond by starting with the words, "Hey, I'm noticing something here."
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of helps you take a step outside the mess that you kind of create for yourself and almost take an objective look at what's going on in the exchange between you and your partner, or you and your own thoughts.
Right. Well, and that's part of it too, right? Instead of it being, right, okay, you never given any attention to me, right? That's a blaming statement at their partner,
Right.
rather than the actually sitting with your experience. And that secure communication is starting with yourself. I'm aware that I'm noticing this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever is outside of you that you're noticing, that you're picking up. The story I'm making up about this is blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm noticing that you're playing video games again.
Yeah.
The story I'm making up is that video games are way more important than I am. And I'm feeling really lonely. And what I really need is for you to put the video game away and for us to go for a walk. When can we do that? Right. And so
without making it a demand or a guilt thing. I love how you ended with, when can we do that? Not like, turn it off now. We're going for a walk now.
And that's the big part too, because there has to be space for your partner to engage with their feelings and what works for them to also meet your needs, right? That's mutuality. That's a relationship. If I just said, you need to turn it off now, that's the demand, right? And then if I never talk to them or avoid them the rest of the day, I'm punishing them, right? And I'm not communicating. That's very passive aggressive.
Interesting.
And
so anxious people tend to be masters of using guilt.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
it sounds like.
Which, I mean, and that's what a lot of the research shows. I mean, it's all, if I can guilt you into loving me, I get the love I think I get the love I want, but in reality, I actually can't trust it. Right. And that's the paradox. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy, is I know I can get you to do what I want, but I actually don't trust it. And that's where the problem lies, right? Because the person isn't choosing you out of free will. They're not choosing to do things because it's in your interest, and they're proving that, hey, what matters to you also matters to me. I'm a good partner, and I'm going to partner with you because we're in a relationship together, right? And we have to work together. Like that, often anxious partners will be very guilt-inducing. And when they start to work towards more inner security, they focus more on themselves and what they want, and they start to ask more of, how can this work for you? How can this work for both of us? And that's what I love, when the couple or the anxious partner gets to that place of like, I'm noticing I want this. How can I make this good for you too? Right? What a beautiful way to work together and kind of hold hands in things. Compared to, I want this. Why the heck are you not doing this? Right?
Right. Give it to me.
Right. Which is again, kind of childish in a way, but shows that that was the strategy you had to use to get your needs met.
Right.
And it's exhausting. I mean, for the anxious partners, it's exhausting to be so demanding. It sucks so bad. And they
probably feel very lonely, because in many ways they're pushing their partner away from them. Mm-hmm. And then you get the, I'm the only one who cares about this. Why am I the only one asserting myself? Why am I the only one bringing up problems? I must be the only one who's invested in this relationship.
Which is interesting, because if you guilt your partner into trying to be in a relationship with you, where's the space for them to be with you? And that's part of the self-fulfilling prophecy. And what we know from research is when partners use guilt-inducing behavior, they feel initially a hit of satisfaction because they might get what they want, but their partner is deeply unsatisfied. And the more that perpetuates, that exchange happens again and again, the more the partner doesn't bring up what they need to be happy in the relationship, the more the partner withdraws, which then reinforces, oh, that partner isn't invested. That partner doesn't care about me. You kind of see what's happening?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I want to ask the next logical anxious person question, which is, okay, I get this. Like, I get how I'm contributing to my own misery and anxiety and frustration. But here's the thing. if I back off of my partner, they're just going to not do anything. Like if I back off and don't guilt trip my partner, if I pull away, if I withdraw and stop being the driver and the person who's like nagging and the person who's like guilt tripping, then my partner is just going to just sit on their butt, or they're not going to engage. And they get a free pass to be completely checked out of the relationship. I think that's the fear that a lot of people are going to have who are listening to this. Absolutely. So what would you say to that?
Well, do you also hear that fear is the reason the person maintains the same behavior? If I let go and give my partner space to show up, they won't. So I have to intrude. I have to demand. That's part of the mistake, right? And if you're in a relationship or marriage where you feel like you're taking 100% responsibility, that's a really hard thing to be in. And what happens, it's super interesting. Avoidant partners often do really love their partners. They struggle to be connected. They struggle with a lot of things. But if you give them space, it's quite interesting to see how they show up. It might take a little bit of time. But if you are also direct about what you want and what you need as you take that step back, they often start to step in. And that's part of what makes it more secure, right? Instead of a pursue, withdraw, which is what you just talked about, we have a more of connect.
I love that.
Right?
It seems like part of the trick to this is learning to kind of rewrite the narrative of who you think your partner is and who you think you are. Mm-hmm. How much of this, I don't know, deals with rewriting the narrative of the relationship that you have between you and your partner in your head, or maybe the right question is, how important is it to focus on rewriting that story?
I think it's important. One, we call in attachment research, we call this internal working models, right? It is a model I have about who I am and myself and what I'm worthy of, and my partner and who they are and what they can give me and how reliable, accessible, and responsive they are, right? And so we all have, right? I have an idea who my partner is in my head. Does that mean it's accurate? Maybe not. Right. But until I start to engage her and talk with her about that, I'm not really going to know. Until I give her space to see what that looks like, I'm not going to really know. And so in terms of this writing out, here is what I believe my partner is. And then starting to test that hypothesis, right? See it as a hypothesis. That can be a really helpful experiment. But in terms of working with couples, like one of the things that I find really powerful comes from emotionally focused couples therapy, where we map out this cycle, right? The pursuing partner and then the withdrawing partner, and we map it out and we name it, right? I mean, I've had couples name this the tragic misunderstanding, the shitstorm, Fred, Steve, what else? Connection blockers, all these different names. And what's so fascinating is then we start to take, whenever either partner starts to do any part of that dance, right? The pursuing or the withdrawing, they then have the awareness, oh, we're doing the connection blocker cycle, or the connection blocker is doing this thing. And I was actually working with a couple last week. And we talked about this belief that the avoidant partner had to know what the anxious partner always needed. Right? There was this pressure that I must always know that. And so we ended up calling that cycle like the fairy tale cycle, right? That I must, in my Disneyland world, know what my partner needs before my partner can actually express what they need. And so I had the partner share, you don't have to do that. I can share what I need with you, and I can be direct with that. And so we did that. And then we named that Tinkerbell will come in throughout the day during any conversation you have and whisper in your ear that you should have knew what your partner wanted before she asked. And that your job is to fight against Tinkerbell and call her out. And it was funny, the week after we met, they came back and said, oh yeah, I called Tinkerbell out before we even started the conversation. Hey, we kicked Tinkerbell out of the room so that way you can be here with me. Right? Totally different conversation. And what's so fascinating is it's then not about each partner. It's about building hands and fighting that cycle together. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Mhm.
I'm curious, like, can you walk me through maybe the basics of how you had them map out that cycle?
Yeah. So I think what it starts with is you go through. I mean, I can even do it really quick right here. Like you go through, right? When you see your partner do blank, right? That's the cue. You feel this emotion, and then you do what? What do you do when you feel that emotion? Right? What?
So let's use a real example, and I'll pull from my marriage really quick, and we'll just have a pretend therapy session.
Perfect.
So I'm talking to my wife, and she pulls out her phone. She's on social media, doesn't acknowledge that I'm talking to her.
And so when you see her pull
Super
out,
common thing for a lot of couples.
right? And when you see her pull out that phone and start typing in that, what do you feel? What emotion do you feel?
Frustration,
Okay.
neglect, loneliness.
Wow, you feel really lonely. Feel like she's not with you.
Unimportant.
Unimportant. And when you're feeling really lonely and you're feeling really unimportant, what do you do? Do you kind of pull away? Do you poke at her? What do you do?
I escalate. I get angry.
Yeah. What do you do? How do you get angry?
I poke harder. I raise my voice.
What do you say to her?
Put your phone down. Can you not hear that I'm talking to you? Is your phone more important than me?
Wow, you really go after her.
This is trial and therapy mode. I love this.
Because what are you trying to do? What do you really want?
I just want to be a priority. I want to be more important than her phone. I want to be acknowledged. I want to know that, like, that I am more important than some funny meme she's looking at.
Of course, you want to know that you matter to her. That's why you're doing all this. And when you start poking at her, when you start saying, put down your phone, don't connect, like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you get close to me? When you start to kind of poke her at it that way, what does she do? How does she behave?
She gets defensive.
What does she say?
She talks about how she didn't hear me, or how I do the same thing to her all the time, or how I'm freaking out over something that's really small and stupid, that kind of thing.
So what do you think so she's feeling really defensive. What do you think she's feeling about that in that moment as she's feeling defensive?
She's probably feeling insecure, like, and guilty. Maybe that she feels like, she probably really does want to make me feel like a priority. And the fact that I caught her in a moment where she wasn't, she probably felt like ashamed and embarrassed.
So she kind of really gets shut down and caught up in how she's not being a good enough partner. Wow. And when she's in that place, she kind of defends and shuts down, and you don't actually get to see that she's really worried about being a good enough partner for you. You never get to see that, do you?
Nope.
Oh. So what would we call this, where you feel really lonely and you feel like you're not important to her, that you don't matter to her, and you go over and kind of poke at her for spending time on her phone, and she reacts defensively and feels worried that she's not a good enough partner? What might we call this? What would we call that dance?
The phone frustration dance.
Yeah. Would she? So now that you know that this phone frustration dance happens, right? When you see her on the phone, you're going to do this thing and she's going to do that thing. What would happen if you just went to her and say, hey, it seems like the phone frustration dance is about to happen. I really am worried that I don't matter. Can we connect for a second? What do you think would happen?
We'd probably end up connecting.
So if you were to risk and kind of reach out to her and say, this phone frustration problem is here, right? What do you think she would do?
She'd probably respond really positively instead of getting defensive.
So you might actually get what you need. Is that it?
That's it.
You see how we did that?
You can hire Kyle at kylebenson.net.
But this is the part too, and there is, you can go into Hold Me Tight book. They outline this whole thing that I just did, but that's a core thing in dealing with the pursue withdrawal part.
I'm gonna grab the book. Hold Me Tight. Worth a read, especially if this conversation is resonating with you.
Yeah. So this, what I just walked through is conversation number 1, the demon dialogues.
Yep.
right? And we just mapped out kind of what Sue Johnson would call the pursue polka. That was it. No, protest polka. That's
Protest polka. Yeah.
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 So
awesome, man. So you have given us a lot of resources here. I don't even know how to recap what we've talked about so far. I'm trying to think if we need to follow this down the rabbit hole anymore.
I think in terms of if we focus back to the anxious individual, there's a lot more stuff that we can kind of explore.
Yeah, let's go.
I think in terms of this, one of the big things that my couples have found really helpful, the anxious partners have found helpful, is we kind of do this reparenting inner work where the person talks about what their inner child didn't get met, right? And the beliefs around that. And then they act in this secure part of themselves and write this letter down to that child part about, hey, like, I love you. I'm going to give you what you need, and kind of offer that in a way. And it's a lot of self-compassion, and that can really lead to kind of some inner healing, right? Mm-hmm. And start to kind of correct some of the real wounding that had happened. So that's a huge thing. The other thing that's really important, and we talked about this before we hopped on, was that this idea of the secure sidekick, right? Think about someone in your life who you are very secure with, who you're direct with, who you're vulnerable with. And in any issue that comes up with your partner, think, if that person was there, how would I communicate with them? Right. Or how might that person communicate with my partner in this way? And I had one client who was like, well, my aunt is so secure and she does this thing. And so her mantra was, if my aunt were here, what would my aunt coach me to say to this romantic partner? Right. And so that essentially puts you in this frame to be more direct and vulnerable. And what research shows is when we prime our brain that way, we stop using those destructive tactics that we talked about, the demanding, the controlling, and stuff like that. So that's a really helpful, very quick thing to do.
It's like having a little shoulder angel.
Yeah, exactly.
If Jean-Luc Picard was here with me right now, how would I act? I don't know why I picked him. He just seemed like a really rational kind of character who's good in a stressful situation, but whatever. Pick your own.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a beautiful way to start to also change your response instead of responding. And so that's a huge thing. And the other thing is, we talked about this before we got on too, is actually prioritizing self-care and your needs.
Why is that important?
Well, if we go back to the anxious strategy, if I focus on you all the time, if I take care of your needs, if I make sure you're okay, then I'm okay. Right. But the problem is, I then get mad at you because you're always taken care of and I never get what I need. I never get what I want. And so part of doing this is breaking that strategy of I must always be caretaking and starting to actually focus on kind of taking care of yourself, right? Going to the gym, going for walks, spending time with friends and family, right? Carving out time for self-care, whatever hobby that is. And I've had anxious partners who are like, I don't even know where to start. I've been taking care of the kids. I've been working. I don't even know what that looks like. And we start to kind of brainstorm. You know, what happens if you have 2 hours on a Saturday and your partner agrees to take care of the kids? What are you going to do with that? Right. And then they start to do that. They start to get a lot more space. And not only does that help them, that also gives them a lot more capacity to be kind of more positive and helpful in their relationship and with their kids too. So, yeah.
I had a chat with Laura Heck a couple of months ago, and she said one of the things that they try and do in their household on the weekends is they have the 3x3x3 rule, which is I protect 3 hours of your time so you can go do what you want. You protect 3 hours of my time so I can go do something that I want. And then we have 3 hours together.
Wow.
Where we're doing an activity, some sort of fun thing together, a puzzle, going for a hike, whatever. But she said that it's been really incredible to see how her husband responds when at the end of the week, she pulls him aside and goes, "You've had a really crazy week. Can I just carve out 3 hours for you on Saturday morning and you just go golfing and I will take care of our kid and I'll take care of the house. And he goes, really? And it really incentivizes him to come back and do the same for her. That's so not only does it like fill your tank, I think, and help you come back with renewed energy and like more to give. But I think if you can play that game with each other and defend each other's time, it creates a really reciprocal relationship where you feel like your partner has your back and kind of it has to start with you taking responsibility for getting your needs met. And I think what happens is when your partner sees you coming back as your very best self, renewed after that alone time or hobby time or whatever it is that you have, they want to give that to you more often if that's the way that you respond to it.
Totally. And that's, I mean, that's such a great way to, one, show I'm going to take care of you, and then you're going to also help take care of me.
Yeah.
Right. And what a great way to feel seen. Wow, you've had a rough week. Why don't you go 2 hours to yourself? What a great way for the partner to go, wow, my partner really knows me.
Yeah.
Right.
We got a comment on here a minute ago from Eva, and she said, I'm having trouble with context here. Maybe you can help me remember. It was about 5 or 6 minutes ago. She said, when this happens to me, I feel like he wants to control my actions. I'm having a hard time really understanding like the context of that comment, but let's presume that I'm trying to think of a situation here where working on this might give your partner some sort of leeway to kind of take control over you or manipulate you in some way.
Well, I think the way I'm reading Eva's comment is the sense that maybe she might be more the distancing. Oh, when she's on the phone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So I think with that, right? How is he approaching that? Right. And what's like, if he's not listening to this, and watching this, like, what's really his insecurity here? Right. Right. Nate, if you were to tell Ava what you needed, what would that be? What if Ava, like with your wife, if she were to say something and you kind of start poking at your wife and trying to control her behavior on her phone, if she were to say something in response that would help you feel connected and help you feel like you do matter, what would your wife say?
Yeah, I think in that moment it would be like maybe like a quick repair attempt. If I had reached out and my wife had not heard me or had ignored me or missed a bid for connection, I would want her to be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were saying something. I'm put my phone down and I'm here. Like, what is it that you need? I want to hear you." Or I want you to know that you're important to me. If she said one of those things, I would probably be like, "Oh, okay. Like I have my wife. I don't have to fight for her attention."
What would happen? I'm really curious too, if she were to say, I really want to listen to you. I got to finish this thing. I'm going to really quickly, and then I'm going to give you all my attention. What if she says something like that? Would that be helpful, or would that time delay be frustrating for you?
Yeah, I think it is that's a great question. I think it would be helpful as long as the time delay was reasonable.
Yes.
And she sticks to it. If she's like, give me 5 seconds and then takes a minute, I'm going to get frustrated. But if she's like, give me 30 seconds and then takes 30 seconds and puts the phone down, I'm like, that's totally fine. So as long as the request is reasonable and it's not like, let me finish the next 10 pages in my book chapter, or let me finish watching this 7-minute YouTube video. Obviously context is important here, but if, as long as the request seems realistic and it's honored, it would be very helpful. But if it's not honored, I'd get discouraged.
Yeah. So if I hope that's helpful, I think also what I'm really curious about is when you feel controlled, what do you do? Right? What is your response in that cycle? If you're noticing your partner kind of saying things or doing things that make you feel controlled, do you then rebel? Do you push back? Do you go isolate? What happens to you that also adds to that dance that you two co-create? And so that's where I'd be really curious. And one of the things you can explore with that is, okay, how can I kind of change this cycle too? What's my part in this dance that I can make this better, right? Do you need to be proactive and go to your partner and say, hey, like I noticed we've been having a lot of issues with the phone. Can we talk about that? I'm wondering if you're feeling really alone or feeling like you don't matter to me. Can we talk about that? Right? That's ways to kind of, right, understand what's going on. And this is one of the big things around attachment theory that's so important is, and Gottman's research too, is that we often think that the topic is the issue, right? And
Yeah.
John and Julie Gottman, they've done so much observational research of couples in their love lab, tons of stuff. And what they say is that the topic doesn't matter. It's all about the attachment needs, right? It's all about the connection, feeling like we're loved, feeling like we're appreciated, feeling like our partner is committed to us. That's the underlying thing. And so if you fight about the phone, you're actually missing the connection part that's actually the most important, the unmet attachment needs. And that's what I would encourage to focus on too. And ask also if you're pushing back and fighting, what is that unmet need for you, right? Do you need some alone time? Do you need time to kind of zone out on the phone, right? And if so, then how do you and your partner make that work for both of you? How do you get your time to recharge or zone out while also giving your partner what they need to be happy with you too? And that's really kind of how we start to hold hands and make this topic not an issue anymore and focus on kind of how we connect. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. Kyle, you're brilliant, man. I love how great you are at articulating this. And I can already see, just like in the comments that are coming in, that this whole workshop is going to open up new possibilities for couples to connect in ways that they've been struggling to connect for a really long time. Yeah. So one, I want to let people know who are watching before we wrap up that Kyle's coming back in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. We'll discuss a specific date and time for him to be back, but I'll let you guys know. And he's going to be coming back to talk about the other side of this coin. Today we talked about the anxious attachment. We're going to talk about avoidant next time we come together and give some really practical, actionable tips. The second thing I want to say is I would love to hear from you, whether you're watching live or in a recording, what part of this workshop resonated the most with you. What is the aha moment that you had? What is the light bulb that went off for you? And then what are you going to do about it? What is the commitment that you're making to yourself, the behavior that you're going to change going forward to see if you can get a better result? I would love to hear that down below. And I'm going to share some of those with Kyle so that he knows that he has inspired you to take positive action to make your marriage even better. Kyle, I know there's going to be people who are listening and watching who want to follow you more closely. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Personally, I would recommend your email list because I think your emails are phenomenal. Mm-hmm. How could they get on that? And then what is anything else that you'd like to kind of let people know about?
Yeah, I think you can just go to my website, kylebenson.net. And I believe at the end of every article, there's a way you can sign up for an email, and I will send you an email once a week for at least, I think, 13 weeks. That kind of is a primer on healthy relationships, communication, intimacy, and conflict. And so I would highly recommend that.
I don't subscribe to a lot of email lists, but yours is one that I prioritize. So I would, for anybody listening, I would highly recommend subscribing to Kyle's list.
Yeah. And I think in terms of us, Nate and I doing this again, like, let us know too. Like, I want to know what's helpful and what you're putting into action, which is a very key part to actually making changes that you want. But also, like, going forward, what else do you want us to talk about? How can we help serve you, talking about kind of the common problems that couples struggle with, and how we can make it easier or better for you. And what we know from research, right, this distance closeness dance that practically all couples do, right? That's like 92 to 94% of problems that every couple deals with.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a core issue, and that we see in research too. And so, just know that it's pretty normal. It's just, we want to change how we do it so that it can be more connecting and not disconnecting. And that's the goal of why Nate and I are doing this.
Love it, man. Really appreciate you taking time to chat with us about all this amazing stuff.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this interview with Kyle, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the subscribers, but because it's doing something great for your marriage. Every week, I come out with a new episode, whether it's a conversation like this one or just me talking to you. And the goal is to provide you with tools, tips, and resources to help you have the most extraordinary relationship possible. So if you want to do something good for your relationship today, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next week with another episode.